Hey guys, this video is a quick introduction into allowances and performance ratings. So allowances count for time to eat, drink, go to restrooms, any interruptions in the work area, any delays, and rest breaks caused by fatigue. The typical allowance percentage in industry is anywhere from about 10 to 35%, whereas the average is about 14 to 18%. So in this video, I'm going to go over some different types of allowances, and more importantly, how to calculate allowances. And there will be a short example for you guys to practice this on. And finally, I'll give a brief introduction into performance ratings. Okay, there are four main categories of allowances. The first and most common being relaxation allowances. And this takes into account things like scheduled break periods, which over here on the bottom right of the screen would probably fall under personal needs. Just about any job I've ever heard of includes scheduled break periods at some point or another. So that would get factored into allowances. Then we have PFD, which stands for personal time, fatigue, and delay. Some examples of this would be physical work for a worker doing very demanding physical work like lifting objects. There's that certain basic fatigue factor right here on the bottom right of the screen. An example of a mental and cognitive allowance would probably be for, say, something like an accountant who's doing very meticulous, repetitive, kind of monotonous work. There's that mental and cognitive allowance. And then lastly, we have environmental and work factors, which would probably fall into, variable fatigue, variable allowances. You could have something like a snowstorm come in, and you'd have to account for that with allowances. If it's snowing, it's really cold out, it's probably going to take workers a little bit longer to do their work, and it's going to be a little bit more demanding. Okay, so the next three allowances are a little less common. I have them all here on one slide. First, we have contingency. We also have policy, and kind of just special allowances, which I'll get to in a moment. So first, with contingency, this is kind of just like unavoidable delays. Things such as waiting for a machine to run or waiting for materials to be delivered, etc. So that's contingency, that's unavoidable delays. Next we have policy, which is not actually really factored into the amount of time that a task takes. It's more kind of just wage incentive. I mean, when you think of allowances, you might think of your allowance from your parents, which is generally what they pay you. So that's kind of what a policy allowance is. And that's usually given by just the wage that the employee receives. Lastly, we have special allowances, which are things such as a new employee going to a new job and having to go through a learning process or a training process. I know for me at my job the past 2 summers where we were building custom electronics, I was pretty much constantly having to ask for help from other employees, so you would definitely have to factor in some sort of learning or training allowance for that. There are several methods for determining allowances. First, we have comprehensive work measurement. This is basically performing very intense work measurements on a certain operation and becoming very, very familiar with the process, and from here kind of calculate the allowances. And this is kind of a subjective method, so we won't really be doing this in this class. Next we have work sampling, which is basically when you calculate the proportion of delays to the number of observations to determine the allowances that should be factored in. Lastly, we have the International Labor Organization, ILO, and this is the method we will be using. They basically came up with a standard for calculating allowances based off of different factors, and these will be covered in the next few slides. Okay, the next 3 slides are just going to cover the International Labor Organization's recommendations as to what percentage of allowances should go towards what task. So here the first thing we have are constant allowances, and these will be applied to any job or any task. So any task, you calculate the observed time, normal time, you're going to apply these, you're going to apply 9% allowance to any job or any task. Then there's things such as the variable allowances, which say an operator is standing all day, that's where you get that 2% from. You add a 2% allowance for a variable allowance fatigue there. As you can see down on the bottom, if you're constantly lifting, pulling, or pushing 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, all the way up to 40 pounds, you have all these different allowances that are associated with it. So kind of what ILO has done is they come up with a standard for allowances based off the task at hand. And then you have even things such as environmental allowances for things such as bad light, or if it's hot or humidity, you get 0 to 100% depending on how hot it is out, if it's really humid. So there's where a little bit of subjectiveness comes into play. And then we also have close attention, so that's kind of attention to detail. If you're designing something with really small tolerances, you got to pay really close attention. That would be very fine or very exacting. And if you're performing a very basic task, you would not add any tolerance to it. Here is the last slide for ILO recommendations. It takes into account things such as noise level. So you have continuous kind of dull noise, you would not add any allowances. If you're working in a factory where there's hammers being hit and machines going crazy, you would add allowances based off of your interpretation of the noise level. There are even more strict standards, such as taking into account dBA levels, so how loud in decibels the work environment is, and there's calculation for that. Also mental strain and monotony. Sorry. So kind of how repetitive, how boring, and how dull a task is. Okay, and oops, it looks like I forgot one more slide on the ILO recommendations, and that is just the last one, which is just the tediousness of the task at hand. So it ranges from rather tedious to very tedious, anywhere from 0 to 5%. Okay, now here's an activity for you guys to do. I want you to read through the problem, and using the ILO chart from before, you're probably going to have to scroll back, and you can pause it on the charts. You're going to want to take into consideration all of the factors listed in this problem, come up with total allowances, and then use the allowances to find the standard time for a task that normally takes 1 minute to do. And that is what you guys are going to be bringing into next class. Okay, so now that you guys have a good understanding of allowances, I want to touch briefly on performance ratings. Performance ratings are kind of have the same idea of allowances. They're just factored in to kind of help normalize or standardize time from observed time. And basically what performance ratings are, as you could probably guess, is they're just a way of rating an operator in their performance and in their skill level and effective speed of getting a task done. And as you can see in the slide, we have 65% is about the slowest performance rating you'll ever give someone, and 140 is the fastest. So 140 in terms of running would be like Usain Bolt. It's pretty much as fast as it gets. Okay, here's a example of a sheet you guys are going to see in class, and basically what this is a chart for documenting your observed rating versus a true rating. And what I mean by true rating is a rating as determined by a panel of experts. And what we're going to be doing in class is you guys are going to have a chance to rate some operators, and then we're going to compare them with their true ratings, so to speak. And then in the graph on the side, you'll have a chance to document basically your observed ratings versus the true ratings on the graph, which will visually display how you tend to rate operators, whether you rate them generally more difficultly than professionals do, or if you're more of a loose grader. So you'll get just a little bit of a feel for that. Alright, and that concludes this video.